Hello and welcome to the Rewind, where we dive into the making and legacy of various films from cult classics to award-winning masterpieces. Today's film is Wild at Heart, the David Lynch directed crime thriller that stars Nicolas Cage and Laura Dern as Sailor and Lula, an infatuated young couple who are on the run from Lula's authoritarian, domineering mother and the criminals she hires to kill Sailor. A controversial and divisive film released in 1990, Wild at Heart has since become a cult classic and for some is cited as the best feature film from the late great David Lynch, who passed away this January of 2025. And joining me today to talk all things Wild at Heart is David Michael Brown, freelance entertainment writer, film critic, radio host, and presenter. And I'm glad to say he's with me today. David, how are you?
Very well indeed. How are you going, Matt?
I'm doing really well, thank you. And Wild at Heart. Now, I want to talk about first time we would have watched this film
Yes,
because I really remember the first time I saw it. What about yourself, David? Do you remember the first time you saw Wild at Heart?
I do. I do. Because I'd been somehow, by hook or by crook, by accidentally renting things out on VHS. I was a bit of a David Lynch fan early on. So I'd
Hmm.
seen Elephant Man and then gone back and tried to see Eraserhead. So me and one of my best buddies, Stuart, uh, had traipsed up from, sorry, I was living in England at the time.
Hmm.
I'm sorry, to go and see Blue Velvet the night it opened. And then we went and saw it the following week, and we loved that experience of going up to London seeing Blue Velvet. So we did the same for Wild at Heart. So I saw it in a cinema on St Martin's Lane, I believe it was, just near Leicester Square. And yeah, we saw it 2 weeks in a row because we were so blown away by it. And by that time, everyone was loving Twin Peaks as well. So the
Hmm.
world was kind of obsessed with David Lynch. And then he brought out this kind of crazy road movie full of sex and violence, and me and my mate Stuart were just like, wow, this is the stuff. And yeah, we went and saw it 2 weeks in a row in London.
So for myself, I saw it on DVD when I was in my early 20s. At the
Mm.
time, I was working at HMV. You remember HMVs, David?
Oh
We used to have
yes,
them
oh
here in
yes.
Australia. I used to work at the really big one they had in Peachtree. It's like a
Mm.
huge HMV they had there. And I worked in the DVD department, which is for a film person is awesome and like a curse at the same time because you get stuff on sale like discounts. So my pay
Yep.
packet was went straight to DVDs. And Wild at Heart was one of those movies I watched. And it's a film just kind of like yourself. I was obsessed with watching it over and
Mm.
over and over. Not only because of the surreal nature of that David Lynch brings to his films and such, but just in its core as kind of like this crime thriller or these two kind of like, you know, uh, this couple that is passionate in love with each other and the Southern Gothic elements to it and the great performances and such. I just wanted to watch it over and over and over again. And that's the first time I saw it was on DVD. And for me, Lynch, for me, is my memories of David Lynch before that is I remember when Twin Peaks came on.
Yeah.
And it's hard, sometimes it's hard for me to explain to my kids this kind of stuff, the difference between what they have now and what we had back when I was their age. They have streaming, they have everything at their fingertips. For us, we had to wait, and I'm
A
sure it's
whole
maybe the
week.
same in the UK. Like you have like three or four channels, you have to wait
Mm.
like weeks, months, maybe even when something gets big over there, or might come like a week later to watch this stuff. And Twin Peaks was just huge when it came out. So that was kind of like my kind of film kind of
Mm.
introduction to Lynch was Wild at Heart, where Twin Peaks was kind of like more of the TV side. But it's kind of interesting you were saying about how Twin Peaks was just a huge thing right there. And I think it comes to this era of 1990 going into the early
Yeah.
90s where pop culture just in general was changing.
Yeah.
The outsiders, the freaks, they were becoming the mainstream. It wasn't only in movies, it wasn't in TV, it was in music, grunge, alternative, kind of that stuff as well was really huge. And Twin Peaks, that comes out April 8th, 1990, which is like a month or two. Actually, I think Wild at Heart comes out in May 1990. So there's like a very small gap in between these two release dates. And that TV show, sorry, was so huge because it was so different to everything else. And all of a sudden, David Lynch, this kind of like art house kind of director who, you know, but before that, Blue Velvet and, Elephant Man, Dune to a certain extent, I guess you can put in there as
Yeah.
well. He's like the guy, like everything Lynchian is you could feel it everywhere. And I think it's just really interesting kind of watching these movies and thinking back to that time because there was just such a transition where this kind of like weird guy, and in many ways he's a weird guy, but in some ways he's kind of like just like your average guy as well. Just like when he does
Mm.
his interviews and such, he kind of took over everything for this little while. You kind of, I'm sure, I imagine you would have felt that as well, that the whole Lynchian kind of landscape was just engulfing all of pop culture at that moment.
Well, it was crazy. I mean, when Blue Velvet came out, it was still very much an art house film, but it kind of hit the mainstream, and then followed by Twin Peaks. And I remember watching that with my family in our living
Mm,
room. You know, my mum and dad would want to see it as well, and it became such a big thing. Everyone was talking about it. You know, who killed Laura Palmer,
yeah.
and so that I think that's the fascinating thing about it is, you know, the world was his oyster at that point. You know, he'd
Mm.
made this film, which was, I believe, was he Oscar nominated for his script for Blue Velvet? I think, or as a director maybe. Uh,
I think he was. I know Dennis Hopper got
yeah.
something like a supporting
Hmm.
nomination.
Yeah. But
I'll
you know,
look that up right
yeah,
now.
he was, you know, hitting the mainstream, and then this TV show changed the face of the way we watch TV and what was being shown on TV. But then he still went off and made this kind of weird, strange, because anyone who watched Twin Peaks would have, you know, there's some strange stuff in Twin Peaks, but it was
Oh
still
yeah.
within the realm of what you could show on TV. And then the level of sex and violence in Wild at Heart and the oddness and strangeness was just cranked up to 11. So I love the fact that people who would have going, oh, it's a new film by the guy who did Twin Peaks. Let's go and see it, and then having their minds blown because Wild at Heart is such a obtuse and weird and wonderful film in just the way it tells its story. I mean, as you said, you got these wonderful performances by Nicolas Cage and Laura Dern in the middle of it, but I just love the way it unfolds and all these kind of little flashbacks to her childhood and what happened to her and like Crispin Glover's character Jingle Dell and the obsessed Christmas cousin, just all those little Lynchian things I just think are fantastic. And I think the fact that people would have been talking about that kind of thing and backwards talking dwarves and all that stuff, I think it's fantastic. And as you say, I think it was a time when, yeah, the geeks inherited the earth, as it were. You know, suddenly, you know, people who like strange movies were kind of cool. Well, I like to think they were anyway.
Well, I think so too, because in the wake of that, you had like Tim Burton, David Cronenberg, all
Yeah,
these people were kind of coming out at that time. Just to follow up on the Blue Velvet thing, Lynch was nominated for Best Director at the Oscars, and he was nominated for Best Screenplay at
there
the
you go.
Golden Globes.
Ah,
So that's that one right there. So let's talk about the making of this film. So it's
mm,
based on a book by Barry Gifford.
yes,
Um, he's at the time he's working on the manuscript for Wild at Heart. A production partner of David Lynch, who worked on David Lynch with on Twin Peaks. His name was Monty Montgomery. So he was the first one to get a hold of Barry Gifford's manuscript.
mm,
He has it, and there's a couple chapters to go, but he loves it, and he's like, I really want to make this film. He wanted to direct the film. He hands the script to Lynch with the hope that David Lynch would be a producer on
yeah,
it. And then David Lynch is like, dude, what would happen if I like and want to make it myself? But Montgomery was very confident into thinking, oh, this isn't his thing, it's
yeah,
too kind of like, But Lynch loved it. And for him, he said that it was the perfect kind of time to have this out. I mean, he said that there's a quote here I have, it was exactly the right thing at the right time. The book and the violence in America merged in my mind, and many different things happened. So unfortunately, Monty Montgomery didn't get to direct the film. Lynch takes over. He rewrites the script because he doesn't like the ending. Supposedly,
yeah,
in the book, the ending is they separate, and there's alternate ending of this shot as well. You can actually find it and watch it as well. So Lynch is drawn to the book, and what he really loved about it is kind of like he had the modern romance in like
mm,
in this violent world. He called it Finding Love in Hell. And it's kind of like it feels like that throughout the movie. It's kind of like you just had these two people that just want to be together, and through all different types of shenanigans, whether it's from Lula's mum, played by Diane Ladd, or whatever else, all the other criminal elements
yeah,
involved within this. They just want to separate these people. They especially want to get rid of Sailor. I mean, that's a big thing. They want to kill him
yeah,
off. But yeah, that's kind of like the gist of it, finding love in hell. And I think what's really cool about David Lynch films is that the way he kind of handles good and evil. Um, the evil aspects of it, especially, they're really nightmarish. And I think Wild at Heart really, really taps into that stuff,
Yeah,
especially in this movie.
Willem Dafoe as Bobby
Mm,
Peru is just creepy, and there's one scene when he ends up in a room alone with Laura Dern's character, and it's just you don't want to even think about where it's going to go, but it's so excruciating to watch because he was never afraid to pull a punch. He always got in there. His camera was in there, and yeah, I mean, you're right. And the way I think they're kind of all the way through it, the focus on fire and flames and like the match being lit. And as you say, they're almost like descending into hell. There's so many scenes when you have like flames kind of positioned over various shots. So in just in terms of yeah, his depiction of evil, he's always like Dennis Hopper in Blue Velvet, for example,
mm.
just terrifying. He's always and Bobby in Twin Peaks. He's always liked to portray the bad guys, and he plays them really well. But the great thing about Wild at Heart as well is, you know, Nicolas Cage's character. He's the hero, but he's a criminal. You know, within a few minutes of the film starting, he's crushed someone's head on some stairs, and you know, he's not a good guy either. So he's got a foot in either evil world, as it were, and also the parallels with Wizard of Oz as well. You know, and the good and the White Witch, all that stuff. Like he loves playing with what audiences think they're watching, and I think that's why his stuff is so brilliant.
The Wizard of Oz influence, that's the main kind of surrealist kind of
Mm.
nature to this movie. It's definitely not something that was in Barry Gifford's novel. That's a
No.
Lynch thing. And Lynch actually said that the reason he wanted to do is that he actually thought that speaking of Sailor, it's like Sailor is a rebel, but imagine being a rebel with a dream of the Wizard of Oz. And he
Mm.
thought that was kind of a beautiful thing where they're going through hell and everything else, but then all of a sudden you have the good witch at the end telling Sailor not to give up on your dreams, not to give up on love. Um, Kind of at first when you watch it, you're kind of like, oh, all right, well, what's this kind of thing? But afterwards, there's a kind of a beauty or a lightness to it that is such a counter to everything else that's happening in the film. And Lynch did say that he actually thought that in doing that he might be coming off as a little too commercial by
Mm.
having like a happy ending at this story. But I think it works. I mean, when watching the film, if you think back on it and if you imagine watching it for the first time and they separate and they go to separate way, they've been through hell and they separate, they don't come back together. I
Yeah,
would be very angry myself. I
yeah.
don't know about you, David, but I would.
And the fact he did end it how he did, though, with the appearance by the White Witch from Wizard of Oz, like if anyone had been doubting the references to Wizard of Oz all the way through it, he kind of hammers it home. Uh, I don't think anyone would have expected the film to end like that. You know, I mean, and that's why we love David Lynch. You know, he never does he expected. But we've been talking about the characters. I mean, Nicolas Cage in this as well
Mm.
is just absolutely fantastic. I mean, I guess when this was made, like he started doing his wild and crazy persona a little bit. He'd been done Eating the Bugs in Vampire's
I
Kiss,
guess, yeah.
and Raising
What's it?
Arizona.
What's the one with Kathleen Turner? Was it Kathleen Turner, the Valley Girl? That's
Oh,
one as well, wasn't it?
I
Yeah.
know Catherine Turner was Peggy Sue Got Married, and
Oh,
when he
so Valley
chose.
Girl must have been Sybil Shepherd, maybe. I'm just trying to
Mm.
think. Okay.
But like you know, he was doing these crazy performances, and this was kind of like that icing on the cake. You know, the I guess what we know as a cult of Cage now, everyone loves it when he goes a bit crazy and a bit
Hmm.
postal. You know, you kind of expect it when you see a Nicolas Cage film. But back then, I mean, he's so glorious in Wild at Heart, and you know, and he looks fantastic as well. You know, the snakeskin jacket, which is referenced throughout the film. You know, he was just a cool looking cat, and played it absolutely brilliantly. I mean, but I think this is a time when he started to kind of believe his own hype as well. If you see
Yep.
shots of him being interviewed to promote the film, there's a famous, I think it was on Terry Wogan, which was a British kind of like chat show, and he comes in and he kind of, I think he does a somersault and he starts throwing money out
Throwing
into the
money. Yeah.
audience. You know, he's just, yeah, he was a bit unhinged, but I think that works so well. Like when he's crooning away to Elvis numbers and smashing whether he's crooning Elvis numbers to Laura Dern or smashing up metalheads or you know the bank robbery that goes horribly wrong, all of that stuff. He's just fantastic in this.
The Matt's Movie Reviews YouTube channel is brought to you by TeePublic. TeePublic is the world's largest marketplace for independent creators to sell their work on the highest quality merchandise. With over 1.2 million designs, TeePublic is sure to have something you'll love. So just looking here at Nicolas Cage's filmography, you have
Mm,
so Peggy Sue Got Married, Raised in
yep,
Arizona, Moonstruck with
yep,
Cher, Vampire's Kiss, and then that leads up to Wild at Heart. Valley Girl came out in '83, so that was kind
mm,
of older. But yeah, leading right up there. Lynch said that when he wrote the script, he pictured both Cage and Dern in these roles. And when it came to Sailor Ripley, that Cage plays, he said that there's an interview I found in the New York Times where he described his character as a kind of romantic Southern outlaw, and he was always attracted to those passionate, almost
mm.
unbridled romantic characters. And Sailor had that more than any other role I'd play. And to me, I think in many ways it's like kind of like the quintessential kind of Nicolas Cage
Yeah,
performance. Yeah, I think it's my favorite of all the movies that he's done. There's something about like that Nicolas Cage where it's kind of like coming into the being of the Cage that we know now.
mm,
You could see the form, of course, Vampire's Kiss had some of that too, but I think this character especially, where you could see him as a leading man,
yeah,
like a romantic leading man, but there's a dangerous kind of persona to him. And again, going back to like the Geeks Will Inherit the Earth kind of thing, he was very much like the outcast. He wasn't like other people in the '80s. There was
yeah,
something different about him, and I think the '90s was a perfect time for him to kind of blossom and become the Nicolas Cage that we know, and that kind of leads on to his all these great performances leading up to the Oscar and then everything since then. Um, I want to talk about the snakeskin jacket
yes.
in the film. So that was
That
his
was his.
idea.
Yeah, I love that.
And for anyone who doesn't know the quote, it's the snakeskin jacket is a symbol of my is a symbol of my individuality and my belief in personal freedom, which is terrific. And it made me think, what are the great jackets in movies? So you have the snakes. For me personally, you have the
Mm,
snakeskin jacket.
yep,
These are my favorites.
mm,
T-Birds jacket. I always wanted a
yep.
T-Birds jacket.
Fantastic.
Marty McFly's jacket in Back to the Future 2 with
Yeah,
the kind of
I
like
was gonna say
stuff.
that. That was awesome. I
Um,
I always loved Han Solo's waistcoat.
yeah.
As a simplified jacket, that was always very cool.
And with Harrison Ford, the brown
Mm,
leather jacket of
yeah,
Indiana
Indiana
Jones.
Jones. Yeah,
And another one I like as well is, and I'm a kind of like I'm a bit of a fiend for those kind of duster jackets, the long blade jacket, kind of like the duster jacket that Blade wears. Wesley Snipes wears in Blade. I love that too. Some people might say Drive, Ryan Gosling as well,
yeah,
could
that's
be
pretty
in there.
cool.
Any others you could think of? Any great kind of movie jackets?
Ah, I mean, you could almost say the costume that sums up a person. It's not a jacket, but just even like James Bond in his tux, you kind of
Mm.
see that, and it sums up the character. And I think that's why this snakeskin jacket works so well for Nicolas Cage. You just see it, and there's no doubt. You go, yep, that is exactly what Sailor would wear. The persona. You just want him to wear something. It's kind of flamboyant, but kind of gritty and something that no one else would wear. And so I think that's why that works well. So I love outfits like that. Anyone else? Anyone else? You've
Another
mentioned them,
one
to be honest.
Yeah, I got I think another one you could kind of say as well, but it's more a suit. Travolta's disco suit
Yep.
in Saturday Night Fever. That goes back again to the T-Birds thing as well.
Mm,
But yeah, I think those are my favorite. But the snakeskin jacket to me is great because not only does it have, looks, it has a look and suits the characters, but it has a philosophy behind it,
yeah.
which is kind of interesting as well. And I really love that kind of whole thing with
Yeah.
the
All clothes should
individual.
have a
Yeah.
philosophy, really, shouldn't they?
They should. I guess so. They're like a second skin, right? They're an extension of ourselves in many ways. Laura Dern. Okay, so she worked with Lynch before in Blue Velvet.
Yes.
She's back here again. She
Yep.
said she wanted to take on the role because it was an opportunity. This is a quote from the New York Times as well. An opportunity to play not only a very sexual person, but also someone who was, in her own way, incredibly comfortable with herself. And anyone who watched this movie would see that Laura
Mm,
Dern is incredibly comfortable with herself in this movie. To the point where it's almost kind of like just like whoa, just
yeah.
a lot of times when you watch the movie. And I think that's something that's really cool about both Cage and Dern is that Lynch told him to go on a road trip. He said, I want you guys to go to Vegas for a week and I just want you two to just hang out with each other.
I hadn't heard that.
And
That's really cool.
so supposedly like they both just really got along. And Dern was saying a lot of times it will just be us driving not saying anything at all, but in those silences, sometimes you just get to know people anyway.
Mm.
It starts off awkward small talk, you have the silences, and then other things going to come out of it. So that was something that was really cool that happened with both of them. Laura Dern, though, I mean, we're talking about Nicolas Cage, kind of like his kind of progression as an actor. Laura Dern as well. I mean, we did talk about Blue Velvet, but then you have this movie. And then after that would be like well, I think she did Rambling Rose, I think, and then
Yep.
after that was Jurassic Park, right? Now it's
Yeah.
kind of like the big thing. But she never went away from the indie spirit of stuff, and she worked with David Lynch again, like in Inland Empire, especially
Yeah.
like years later. And I think she's really one of those kind of when it comes to those great Hollywood actresses, especially in the 1990s. For some reason, Laura Dern's name doesn't come up as often, but I reckon
But
she
it
should
should.
because of
Yeah.
performances like this and the other things she's done in that decade as well.
And also, like, if you were thinking about the casting of Wild at Heart, and you
Mm,
heard it was Nicolas Cage, and who's going to be opposite him, someone who's going to stand up to him and be his equal, and just deliver a firecracker performance. And the fact that her last film with Lynch was Blue Velvet, you wouldn't afford a Laura Dern because she plays such
mm,
an innocent in Blue Velvet. And
mm.
then the switch of character, like she's absolutely fantastic in this. More than holds her own. Like I just love the scenes when the pair of them are just driving,
Mm.
and there's one great scene where she's flicking through the radio trying to see kind of hear just or grab any music, and all it is like it preachers and like
Violence.
horrific
Yeah.
news and all this stuff, and she kind of freaks out and screeches the brakes on and jumps out of the car and says, "Yeah, get me another station. I need some music," and just stuff like that. She's just those nice little touches. But as I briefly mentioned before, the it's mainly her character who we hear a lot more about her past. So those
Mm.
flashbacks to her as a child uh, are just really eerie and creepy, but she really, really sells them. I think it's a fantastic performance. It's one of those unheralded, like everyone wild at heart, most people go on Nicolas Cage, but really it is just as much her film, and she's absolutely fantastic in this.
Supposedly, Lynch said during the rehearsals that he wanted both of them to think of Elvis Presley and Marilyn Monroe. Those were kind of the things. I do see, of course, you do see a lot of Elvis in Cage. Marilyn,
Mm,
I don't know if I see a lot of Marilyn in Lula, though. I think with Lula, you do see kind of like a bad girl 1950s archetype. But
yeah.
I don't know if Marilyn Monroe was necessarily that. Like she was sexy and she was seductive, but it was kind of
Mm,
like it's a different sexy
yeah.
seductive as opposed to what Lula is, especially with the whole Southern accent kind of
Mm,
thing as well. But it was an interesting note, I think. I think more than anything else is the sexuality that he
yeah.
wanted to bring out of Laura Dern. Speaking of which, Diane Ladd, who's the mum of
Yeah.
Laura Dern, plays her mum in Wild at Heart. Fortune. Marietta Fortune. Okay, so she forbids Lula and Sailor have this relationship. Essentially, she's the one who begins this kind of spiral into darkness. She wants Sailor out of Lula's life
Yeah.
for reasons in the movie. I don't want to give away way too much. There's like a backstory there as to why, but she's the one who kind of like gets the ball rolling and sending these different deranged kind of criminals and hitmen and all these other people to try to get Lula and Sailor. Um, I think it's a fantastic performance. I mean, when in a movie that where a
It's
lot of people
unhinged.
exactly, that's a word, in a movie where a lot of people kind of go there and go
Mm,
out there, I think Diane Ladd in this movie has the most kind of insane scenes, the makeup scene especially,
yeah.
with the lipstick all over her face and that kind of stuff. That was crazy, but also the scene where she's trying to, I don't know if you call it seduce, it's much more transparent that it's trying to seduce Nicolas Cage in the events leading
Yeah.
up to the beginning. I think that was just a crazy kind of thing as well. And I think she's the one who got the Oscar nomination for
Yeah.
this role above
Yeah.
on top of everyone else. And I think a lot of people kind of tapped into that. This is not necessarily what she's known for, but she really does go there under Lynch's direction. I think she's just fantastic in the movie.
And the fact she's got shares a lot of scenes with Harry Dean Stanton, who's
Mm,
just fantastic in this as well. And the antithesis of Diane Ladd's character, because he's such this kind of nice, gentle, guy who's just there and kind of out of his depth, and what his character has to kind of start doing.
hmm
As you say, you don't want to reveal too much if anyone out there hasn't seen the film, but I think that's the thing, and it goes with most of Lynch's stuff. Like the range of characters he portrays, and sometimes you meet these characters and they're absolutely fantastic, and you meet them for a few couple of minutes tops, or there's a later on as they're traveling across the states, they go to a motel and they'd be around a pool, and just a bunch of like Ted Nance, who people would know as a Radiohead, would come up and just have a couple of minutes and then walk off again. But you have all these strange characters coming in and out of focus, and it's wonderful. And he gets some great performances out of those people, even if they're minor characters in the overall piece.
Speaking of great performances, and you said before Harry Dean Stanton's in the movie, Chris
Mm.
McGlover is in the movie for this
Yep,
very kind of odd
I love that.
flashback sequence as Dell, the cousin who went
Who
missing after a while.
and he's obsessed with
Um,
Christmas and
yeah.
puts cockroaches in his underpants, spends like 24/7 making sandwiches for himself, and thinks his aliens are coming down with black gloves. It's like this perfectly produced 1.5 minutes of insanity. Uh, yeah, I mean, if that doesn't make you want to go and see this film or rent this film or get this film from somewhere, you should because yeah, Jingle Dell is an absolutely glorious character.
Then you have Willem Dafoe, who we
Oh
talked
yes.
about before as Bobby Peru. He's a career criminal. For me, I think one of Dafoe's most memorable transformations and one of his best performances.
Mm,
So I read this review he did with where was it? Film School Rejects when he was talking about The Hunter. I remember that film they shot in Australia about
yes.
10, 12 years ago. And the interviewer brought up Wild at Heart. And so Defoe said that it was one of those rare cases where it wasn't that hard to get into the headspace of this guy because David Lynch sets the world. And in this world, you have that evil in it that he could so very well kind of taps into and manifests, and all those elements kind of gets just comes to life. It kind of animates this guy who Defoe called as a person without regrets, in just pure hunger and pure evil. That was his quote. And then you add the teeth, and then you add the little mustache, and then you
Yeah.
add the accent and all those other things, and boom, we got Bobby Peru. And you were mentioning before about that scene with him and Laura
Mm.
Dern. I don't know how you describe. You wouldn't call the scene a seduction scene because it's much more violent
Yeah.
and disturbing and creepy than that. But then he probably has one of the best quotes in the movie, one of the best lines, which is those guns are full of dummies, dummy, at the end during the bank robbery. But yet he's just fantastic in this movie, and the crazy thing he doesn't just show up until like the third act
Yeah.
of the film.
But
He's
his
kind of
third.
there's allusions to him throughout. It's kind of like
Mm.
someone's like the bad guys are calling someone you don't know who it is, and
Yeah.
then he shows up. But I just think that it's one of the most memorable kind of things
Mm.
he has ever done. And this is Willem Dafoe we're talking about. He's a guy that has
He's
done
done
a
some work.
ton of memorable performances before Wild at Heart and after as well. I just love the work he does in this film.
I interviewed Willem Dafoe on the set of Daybreakers, that
Okay,
Aussie vampire film, and he signed my. I have no idea where it is. He signed my DVD of Wild at Heart, so that was pretty
nice.
cool.
So production of this film, 1989, begins in Los Angeles and New Orleans. Budget of 10 million,
Mm.
which is kind of crazy to think considering all the stars that are in it. But then again, back then they're not as big as
Yeah,
they are now. I mean, 10 million is pretty much these days is like Nicolas Cage catering budget on his movies, you know. But yeah, 10 million bucks. So they filmed there. And one thing that's really important that we haven't really touched on yet is the music in the film.
oh,
Um, there are the three things I want to definitely talk about. The first thing was the Elvis Presley
yep.
thing with Nicolas Cage's character of Sailor. So David Lynch gave Cage a copy of Elvis's Golden Records, kind of like a compilation thing, and he said he has to sing two songs, "Love Me"
Mhm.
and "Love Me Tender."
Yep.
And so that's actually Nicolas Cage singing in a
Yeah,
movie.
yeah.
That's him. That's his voice, which is actually quite impressive. Actually,
Mm.
I found how he did that. I love that scene where he's in the metal gig, and then all of a sudden it turns into a, Elvis kind of tribute kind of thing. Speaking of that metal gig, the band, the thrash metal band, whose
Yeah.
music you hear the crunch of the every time they're about to go nuts or whatever. It's kind of like the cue, right?
Mm.
Is a band named Power Mad. So they were a real thrash metal band from Minnesota. They released one album in the late 80s called Absolute Power in 1989. They didn't get much in a way. They had like one video and then Wild at Heart gave them a little exposure, but it wasn't
Yeah.
enough. At that time, the thrash metal scene was very heavy, Metallica and Slayer and
Yeah.
stuff. And then they came back again. They released another album in 2015 and they're back out there and they're playing. So that's a real band. That's actual thrash metal band. Then you got Wicked Game.
Yeah,
Chris
which was
Isaac.
huge. Such a massive
Huge.
song. Yeah.
Yeah. In the film clip was black and white, and you see Nicolas Cage, but then it has segments of Laura Dern and Nick Cage from the movie
Mm.
in a thing. And I don't know about you, I've talked to these other people. I miss the days when music, like music made for movies by artists, like pop artists, they
Oh,
feature scenes from the
yeah.
movies. Because when we were younger, we can have the trailer and wait weeks and weeks until it comes out at a theater or wait till it comes out in video. But then you have the music video, which shows scenes from the movie, and
Yeah.
you're getting little snippets of the film. And I absolutely love that. And this song is just like a classic song. I
Mm.
mean, Wicked Game, I dare to say probably the most famous song in Chris Isaac's whole catalog.
Oh, completely, completely. And yeah, it kind of top charts. And as you say, when I used to back in England, I was watching Top of the Pops, but I'm sure it's the same watching Rage here. Uh, yeah, it was everywhere, and it meant that clips of the film were shown. And I agree. I used to love that era. Whether you're watching songs from Top Gun or whatever, you'd see clips from the movies while watching these pop tunes. And yeah, Wicked Game was such a beautiful, beautiful song. And the fact that it was against some of the most ugly scenes going on in the movie was just a fantastic choice.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Amazon Prime Video. One of the best on-demand streaming services available, Amazon Prime Video features exclusive Amazon originals as well as popular movies and TV shows. Watch Amazon Prime Video anytime, anywhere. It's such a great song because the tone of it, that kind of
Mm,
like that gothic kind of yearning kind of love song in there.
yeah.
And Chris Isaac's, the his singing style brings up, Elvis, Roy Orbison, those kind of guys,
Mm.
and it matches kind of Sailor's and Lula's kind of aesthetic throughout the film, that kind of
Yeah, the whole
1950s
50s.
kind of
Yeah.
thing. I mean, it was just a perfect. Sometimes a song comes along and matches a film just
Yeah.
perfectly. Like when it comes on, you
You think
remember
of
the
the
film,
film.
and that's one of them for sure. All right, so early test screenings for the film were like really poorly received. I mean, supposedly in the first one, like 80 people walked out during a torture scene. So Harry Dean Stanton's character, we kind of alluded to, his
Mm,
name is Johnny Farragut. He's a private detective, but he's madly in love with Luther's mum. And he's kind of tasked with going to New Orleans to try to find them. But at the same time, there's this other group of people trying to find, Sailor and them as well, who are like just really bad guys.
mm.
And they get Johnny in their crosshairs. And I don't want to give away too much, but there's kind of like quite a violent kind of torture scene in
Mm.
it, which supposedly was even worse because the first test screening, 80 people walk out. And then they do another test screening, and Lynch said like 100 people walked out during that scene. So he's like, he knows that that scene is kind of killing the film. So he
Mm.
did agree to cut it down some so people weren't running out of the theater. And I think what's really interesting about that scene is that, and I've read a few interviews with Harry Dean Stanton coming up to years. I just wanted to see if I could find any background from that. Whenever people bring up that role and
Mm.
that they bring up this scene and they constantly say, "I hated watching that scene," because Harry Dean Stanton in this movie, of every other character in the film, he's kind of like the most level-headed, kind
Yeah.
person throughout the film,
He's a
and
nice
he gets the
guy.
worst out of everyone.
And I think it's a testament to Harry Dean Stanton as an actor. You know, he comes across as such a lovely guy when you see interviews with him, uh, and always nails the performance. So the fact he played such a nice guy, who we end up seeing, I don't think people want to see him tortured.
No.
There's plenty of other people in that film who would deserve to be tortured, I reckon.
I just want to ask, so you watched this film in the cinemas, and you and your
Yeah,
mate, you went there 2 weeks in a row.
yeah,
I watched it on DVDs. It's different to mine, but when you're in there and you're watching this movie, and at that time, the
mm,
violence and the sex especially,
mm,
quite graphic for the time of
yeah,
1990. Like we're,
mm,
we're living in the world of Game of Thrones now, totally different.
yeah.
What was it like being in a cinema, and what were people's reactions to that? Do you remember any kind of visceral kind of or
Oh,
response to
look,
that stuff?
the biggest response, uh, and I've seen it on the big screen since as well, is always the bank robbery.
Right.
The end of the bank robbery.
Yeah.
Who blows their head off? Again,
Yeah.
limbs are flying, dogs are picking up limbs. All of that stuff is like normally hoots of laughter, but that kind of nervous laughter. But in terms of watching the film, I think, and it goes probably for most of his films as well, Lynch's films. because of his use of sound, not just the music, but the soundscapes he creates are just loud, rumbling noises in the background. I mean, if you, especially watching Elephant Man and Eraserhead, the sound is so unnerving and so disturbing that you're kind of overwhelmed. And I think that goes on with definitely with Wild at Heart when you've got these close-ups of matches I talked about, and there's just loud, deafening slabs of noise, and then you got the Elvis and you got the thrash metal band. So he kind of, I think he really plays at just trying to kind of unsettle an audience. So to be honest, most of the times I've seen it, people are just awestruck and
Mm.
quiet. I don't think they quite know what they're seeing. There are little pinches of humor in all the way through it. So there are moments when people laugh. But the biggest response is always, when I've seen it, is always kind of for the bank scene at the end, and then maybe some what kind of noises
Mm.
when the White Witch appears at the end, because that
Yeah.
is so out of.
You gotta prepare yourself for that when watching a Lynch film, though, right?
But by the time you've got to that point, you've seen a lot,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
it shouldn't surprise you too much. But I think if you ever get a chance, anyone watching ever gets a chance to watch a David Lynch film at the cinema, just do it. They're just fantastic on the big screen.
I remember watching Inland Empire at
Mm.
a cinema screening, and I remember I think everyone was just. I don't think I heard anyone say anything for. And that film goes for. That's quite a long film, to what I remember as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was just like a world kind of thing. And again, the audio kind of soundscape and stuff from that
Mm-mm.
was something that was really comes to mind. So Wild at Heart is finished one day before it debuts at the 1990 Cannes Film Festival.
Which is
So it's in
nuts.
a grand auditorium.
I wonder what they're doing on that last day.
Yeah, me too.
Find
A lot of cuts, I think. So the film screens and it gets wild cheering from the audience, but supposedly afterwards, when it actually wins the Palme d'Or, Bernardo Bertolucci was actually the jury president that year. It wins, and then people lose their shit. So the G's almost drowned out the cheers, and the one person who was actually leading the detractors against Wild at Heart winning was Roger Ebert, the film critic
Hmm.
of the Chicago Sun-Times at the time, and also on the TV series was it At the Movies? Was it At the
Hmm.
Movies that they did? I'm pretty sure. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, I'm not
Um,
sure.
but he and later he would release his review and he gave it like 2.5 stars and he said that he likes Lynch as a real kind of like original filmmaker, but he thought that some of the violence was really offensive, repulsive. He even said there was he had some claims of misogyny and racism in his towards Lynch in the film, which I'm trying to think what that could be, and I think I'm pretty sure that Ebert had the same kind of things said in Blue Velvet in regards to Isabella Rossellini, which he comes out kind of like all
Hmm.
naked, like he thought that that was kind of like unbecoming of an actress of her stature to
But
be portrayed
this
in
is,
that way.
and don't get me wrong, I absolutely love Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, but like Ebert wrote the script to that,
Yeah, yeah,
was associated with Russ Meyer, and so it was always funny when he got on his high horse,
yeah. I found
about
so
certain
too.
movies, and I think Lynch was probably one of those directors. He obviously just irked him, so
Yeah,
he
I
always
think
picked,
so.
yeah,
Yeah,
because Isabel Rossellini is fantastic in Blue Velvet. I mean, that's an extraordinary performance, and she's also in Wild at Heart. We haven't mentioned her yet,
yeah. She
and
plays Perdita Durango
mm,
in the film. Yeah, which is
and
a fictional character written by the novelist. So yeah.
yes, and she's fantastic in Wild at Heart as well. I mean, she's a
Mm.
fantastic actress. But yeah, so I don't really know what Roger Ebert's going on about there.
Yeah,
Who
me either.
knows?
And it's kind of odd to me that I don't know. The whole kind of like I've never been to a Cannes. I don't know if you've ever been to a Cannes film festival. I'm not sure or
No.
anything like that. But the whole kind of aspect of the booing the film winning an
Mm.
award kind of thing, and having a film critic kind of like lead the charge kind of thing. To me, that kind of I don't know. Maybe that's like an old school kind of thing. I'm not sure. I
Yeah.
mean, we've been doing this for quite a while now. I don't think I've ever seen it at any festival I've ever
No.
been to. But that's just a really odd thing for me. If you don't like it, write your piece and then put it
Yeah.
out. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah. We don't need to listen to you.
No, exactly. All right, so the film's released. Okay, so August 17, 1990 in the US.
Mm.
Polarized critics. Still to this day, I think it's got like a little over 60% on Rotten Tomatoes or such. I'm not sure. But makes $14 million against its $10 million budget.
Yep.
So, goes not too bad. I imagine maybe Wicked Game might have helped it a bit as
Yeah,
well, and
definitely.
all that stuff. So when it comes to nominations, Diane Ladd. Academy Award nomination for Best Actress and also Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actress. Willem Dafoe, Independent Spirit Award for Best Supporting Male. Um, so when the film comes out, divisive. But I think since then, and I think it's my opinion too, is that Lynch has done 10 feature films,
Yeah,
10, which is amazing because he's actually done like 100 something other short films or whatever and
yeah.
video clips and everything else. But the feature films 10, to me, it's up there for sure in the top three. Up there if I was
Oh,
gonna,
I
I'll
agree.
probably put
Yeah.
Elephant Man one, maybe Wild at Heart two or three.
Mm.
I think since the movies come out, now that people probably seen it since that time, cable, physical media, streaming, maybe re-releases, and you said you saw some re-releases in the cinema and such.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I think since then, a lot of people look to it much, much more kind of because number one, I think us to have grown up with Lynch are just a little bit more used to
Mm.
Lynchisms and such and stuff that he has in there. But also, you know, I think Cage and Dern and Defoe, those are kind of like those are our actors.
Yeah,
This is people we
completely.
grew up watching, and I think like a film like Wild at Heart, while it does have a lot of the Lynchian surreal
Mm.
aspects to it as well, I think overall it's kind of like just a crime thriller, kind of like this romance, almost kind of like a black comedy kind of film to it as well. I think it's aged really, really, really
Mm.
well, and I think that when it comes to a lot of people in that, there's some career best work in there as well.
Oh,
What do
definitely.
you say?
Look, I agree. I mean, I think people are just looking back at Lynch a lot more now and rediscovering his stuff because obviously we're not going to get any more David Lynch films now. I think that was a fascinating thing when he did pass away. Uh, I was genuinely upset when I heard the news. It was really,
Mm,
really sad. But what I wasn't expecting was kind of like you look at your social media when anything like this happens and people are commenting. And it was almost the same as when like David Bowie or Prince passed away. Like
mm,
every single comment on my social media was like David Lynch, David Lynch, David Lynch, and all these people coming out with stories and coming out with their favorite films and how they experience them and obviously a lot of people talking about Twin Peaks. And I think it's like people, if you look at his body of work, I mean, it's extraordinary. You said 10 films, and I can't think of a bad one in there. I mean, you
mm.
mentioned Inland Empire. That was a tough watch from memory. I haven't seen it for a long time, but you do look back at his films now with a different lens. And yeah, I mean, and there aren't many auteurs out there working
No,
like David Lynch at the moment. And you talk about directors from our generation, and I think you mentioned Cronenberg earlier, but you got all these people like Joe Dante and David Cronenberg and John Landis, all these people who are incredibly popular in the 80s are barely making movies anymore,
yeah,
and Lynch hadn't made a movie for ages. Like he returned with Twin Peaks, The Return, which was almost like I can't remember how many episodes there were, but it was a monumental piece of work. Wasn't it 18 episodes? Each one was at least an hour. So you just got a massive big David Lynch movie. But I think people are looking back at his stuff now and are thankful that he made to have lived in an era when David Lynch was making movies. Uh, and yeah, you just look back and there's memories attached to the film now as well. Uh, and I think again because I think you mentioned again about the connection with Nicolas Cage as well, and people are loving since Mandy and Color Out of Space and all these kind of films when he has done the full Nicolas Cage postal. So I think people have been looking back at older Nicolas Cage as well. And then you got the Chris Isaac connection. So there's so many things about Wild at Heart that at the time you probably brushed off a little bit, but now you look back and go, wow, he had Chris Isaac on the soundtrack and Nicolas Cage was in it and Laura Dern was in it. And like even Sherilyn Fenn from Twin Peaks pops up for like a brief moment and this amazing cast. So I think there's so much to enjoy in there that people are now looking past. As you say, they probably just didn't know what to expect when it first came out. The fact that
yeah.
it got cheered and booed at Cannes shows you that it is a film that was always going to split opinion. But I think maybe now the opinion is more in favor because we're not going to get another David Lynch film, so let's enjoy what we have.
I think when I look back and think of Lynch's whole kind of career in regards to film and TV, is that these days. you can't get anyone like that anymore who can make the impact that he did on the big market.
No.
To have a David Lynch film, you think about to have a David Lynch film in cinema, his influence on TV at the same time, and then later music videos and everything else, is quite remarkable because I do believe there are people out there that are just as individual, just as gifted and such. But the problem now is the access to try to get to those big kind of marketplaces where a lot of people in the mainstream can watch them
Mm.
is either denied, especially on a big screen, because it just seems like it's much more of a corporatized kind of thing more than anything ever before, even back to the 80s,
Yeah.
where Lynch kind of started off. Or they're lost in this just this swamp of just releases on every streaming platform where we probably even missed it. There could have been a lot of films, and I come across, I don't do any more in regards to new releases anymore. But when I
Mm.
did, I come across guys and their movies, and I think to myself, this should be seen by more people and such. And I'll talk to them about that. And they said, I love more people to see it. But, right now, all I can get is a Prime release
Yeah.
and it's like not even in the first page or whatever. And
Mm.
people miss it. And I think that we look back at times of where a Lynch or a Cronenberg or anyone like that that had their movies out there for mainstream consumption,
Yeah.
and those are just really good times because it was not only a thing of having option, but it's also a thing of having a different visionary on the
Mm.
screen doing what they do in the way that they do it. And even if you're not a fan of what the work is, and sometimes, I might watch a Lynch thing and I might not be, but you got to, Inland Empire being an
Mm.
example of that. But you got to damn appreciate the fact that they've done it and they're doing it anyway. And I think that's something that Lynch resonates with me anyway.
And also, you always get the impression, and I'm sure it's not 100% correct, but he just did what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
There was no one apart from, maybe the odd test screening and censors kind of demanding trims of his films. But he always seemed to be, he just, you know, did his own thing. He probably didn't see himself so much as a filmmaker as an artist, he was
Mm.
making these works of art. And he did what he did, and it took a little while for people to understand them and kind of appreciate them. But then suddenly, I think the collision of Blue Velvet followed by Twin Peaks followed by Wild at Heart made suddenly Lynchian was a word that people used, and suddenly he was in the mainstream. But then he carried on. You look at the films he made since then, like stuff like Lost Highway, they're absolutely
Mm.
crazy,
Yeah.
and there's no
Mulholland
way.
Drive.
Yeah, there's no way there was someone there going, "Oh, we don't think you should do that," or really, he just did what he wanted to do, and if it meant sometimes he's working on a lower budget, you never notice because his films always look glorious.
Mm.
Uh, but he never had seemed to have anyone telling him what to do, and but he still got the budgets to make his films. I guess later on in his career, as people were and studios etc. were getting more worried about making movie and getting return for their dollar, which I'm sure they were worried about earlier, but that seems to be, as you said, more of a thing. He stopped making movies because he
Yeah.
couldn't get people to invest. But for a period, he was untouchable. He was, literally no one touched his films. He did what he wanted. They went on the big screen, and they were just fantastic to see.
He was. There's only one David Lynch, or only ever will be one David
Yes.
Lynch, and
Yeah.
Wild at Heart is like one of the many, many examples of that. And for everyone out there who hasn't seen it, I really, really recommend you watch it. I really do.
Mm.
If you want to watch like just a really great kind of look, I guess in a nutshell, you could say it's a crime thriller romance kind of movie, but it's so much more than that because of what Lynch brings to it and what the actors bring to it as well. And I really recommend people check out this film if they haven't. If you had, I'm so glad that you're listening and going
Watch
down
it.
memory lane with us, with myself and David Michael Brown. I thank you so much for your time today. I'm
Absolute
going to make
pleasure.
sure that I'll have all links to anything you have coming out in the show notes, so everyone check out David's work. And yeah, thank you so much again for joining me today and talking all things Wild at Heart and David Lynch. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content.